Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with my co-hosts Daniel Quinn and Courtney Staples. On today's episode, we have a new prompt from a new listener. But before we get into that, I want to remind everyone that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can click the link, follow some instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, you can always go to our YouTube and Twitter with links for that in the description. Or if you want to come and talk to us more directly, you can go to our Discord where we have conversations going on all the time, including, and this is important, hey, we've got a survey up. So if you want to take a survey and tell us how we're doing, what your favorite and least favorite parts of the podcast are, we value your feedback, and we have a survey up over on the Discord right now. And I think in the show notes, probably in the show notes, you should check there just in case. But if you're feeling particularly generous, you can always give us money over on Patreon, where you get access to sweet, sweet patron-only goodies. Go ahead and check out our Patreon for more details there. Now, with all of that out the way, let's go ahead and dive into it. This new prompt is from new submitter Junie, where the prompt is: this world is separate from most others, and there is a giant tower that looks to go up indefinitely. There are people called tower climbers who can leave and climb the tower. The tower climbers are people who have been ripped from other worlds and forced to climb the tower. Tenet 1. The world has very limited space besides the tower. Tenet 2. The people who are native to the tower mostly won't try and climb the tower except if they are moving to another town. And number 3. In the tower, there is a type of corruption that makes creatures more hostile and stronger. An example would be if you had a normal goblin and a corrupted goblin, the corrupted goblin is bigger, stronger, and more deadly. So getting very strong Tower of Babel vibes from this one, but I'm very interested to see where we go with this one. I have a spicy one, but I want to hear from you guys first. So Courtney, why don't you start us off today? What kind of, especially because I'm also getting Wuxia Tower vibes, which we did with Clark many moons ago. Courtney wasn't here for that one. So what have you got for us, Courtney?
Yeah, so my tenet is that the tower is actually the calcified corpse of an unimaginably large entity.
I am not surprised.
Well, there's no blood if it's calcified. I mean, I guess there could be
There
blood
was,
if it's like a magical thing. Maybe there's like fountains of blood going on. That'd be cool.
So, okay, so are we talking calcified, ossified, or petrified here, Courtney?
What's ossified again?
Everyone's furiously Googling.
Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking basically like preserved in some way. In that it's like turned into some like hardened
material.
Yeah.
Okay, understood. The reason I ask is because what is the geometry of this creature? Is it humanoid? Is it non-humanoid? Like, are there vague shapes that people can make out every now and then, or what are we thinking about here?
I was kind of inspired by like the cosmic serpent that we had in some episode a ways back.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So like I'm definitely open to your ideas too, but I was thinking like a massive serpent snake-like thing. So it's pretty vertical.
So a very tower-shaped kind of dragon snake, maybe.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay. So in terms of geometry, in terms of shape and other things, we're mostly looking at like, oh yeah, no, it's very much like a coiled serpent. And then what makes it interesting and different? Is it like, oh, every now and again you'll see like scales or like a claw or maybe even like a little mini head or something like, or wings even? Like, what are we looking at that makes this like different than just a regular tower shape?
Yeah, I like the idea of it being coiled in some way, like maybe some parts are more straight and others get very twisted, and you could even have like the spine and rib cage as different floors or sort of supportive structure behind it all. And then whatever like organs or blood fountains are left behind. And it could have some other sort of fantastical things like wings or horns. Maybe it was pregnant and had eggs or babies inside of it.
Oh, wow.
Of course,
Yeah.
because you're a monster.
Yes.
It is known, Daniel. It is known.
I like the idea too of it being such a unusual thing that it's not noticeable really, unless you start
Yeah.
to learn about it more and traverse it. Because this thing's presumably this tower is so huge, like he says that it seems to be limitless in height. So I could imagine, like, even if you had sinuous shapes and stuff, it might seem like an unusual tower until you've taken stock of the whole thing. I mean, or as much as you can
Yeah.
of it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I imagine that like the tower climbers themselves will probably like understand that, oh, this is in fact a monster, like or
Yeah.
a creature. But like for the majority of people there, they're like, yeah, what do you mean? It's just a tower. It's like where we live,
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, with the listener's tenet that the people who are native mostly won't try and climb the tower except if they're moving. So yeah, I could see them even like being very dismissive of the theory that this thing is a living or was a living entity at some point. Like, that's ridiculous. What are you talking about? This isn't a rib cage. This is the foundation of this floor.
Oh, okay. Wait. I just got this crazy idea because I'm thinking about like the idea that this is a giant world serpent, right? But I'm also thinking, what does the world serpent do? Wraps around the world, eats at the roots of the world tree. Is this thing coiled around the world tree itself? And like people really only know about the tower. So like you can add both of these kind of divine elements, but one is actually like a tree and the other is like the serpent wrapped around it and we inhabit the serpent or something like that.
I mean, I
Oh,
like that
interesting.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. And like, again, the prompt says the world has very limited space beside the tower. So like maybe the rest of the quote unquote world is the world tree with this massive thing wrapped around it. So like you can get to the world tree portion and like the base of it, the roots. Oh, maybe the roots are connected to like all the different worlds that are mentioned in the
Ooh,
prompt.
that's a good idea.
And do have some commentary on the people that are in the village as my prompt.
Well, that sounds like a segue if I've ever heard one, Daniel. So why don't you hit us with your prompt then, Daniel? What do you got for us?
Because like you guys, I'm imagining a very narrow space restricted to whatever this tower is. But my thought was that the actual people who supposedly live there are in fact people who were brought over to climb the tower and could not, and so they and inevitably ended up forming a society below it.
Oh, okay.
In essence, there aren't really people native to the place.
Oh, I see.
They're just more native than the tower climbers, basically, right? Because they're like, we've given up, and it's been generations since our ancestors have given up.
Right. They're basically like former tower climbers who have made a life and then had children, and now they don't know anymore that they were tower climbers.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, Daniel. I like that quite a bit. And I like the idea that there's still like people who are coming from other dimensions. It's like the natives aren't actually native. I think that's kind of an interesting conceit.
Yeah. There's a short story by Ted Chiang in the collection Story of Your Life and Others, where it's about the Tower of Babel and about people climbing it. And it is kind of similar to this, where like people have settled on each floor, like they're building it as they go up, but eventually people stop and settle and have families, and but you still have these like construction workers continuously going up to the top to attempt to reach it.
That's what I imagine too. Like the villages, like assumably if it's limitlessly tall, I'm guessing there's some sort of base or entrance point. And I can imagine there being a lot fewer people there than those in higher levels where they kind of ended up settling as they traveled up. And the higher you go, you get the descendants or the remnants of people who've gone higher and higher until you get like, the probably the people who are most far removed because they've been so far up, and I could also imagine if it's generations of people, lore about the tower has been forgotten. And, if you have someone who's gone up a bunch of levels and then they've built, a society there and they passed away and generations passed, like that knowledge would be really valuable, and then at the same time, it's also that knowledge is higher up, right? Because they're not coming back down. So you can't learn some of the details about it until you've gone up enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. This got me thinking about like, why are people going up? And now wondering if this serpent had actually like cracked the tree in half and like the top of it is at the top of this tower. Like it's been pulled apart essentially. So people are trying to seek out the top portion, but even that lore has probably been lost over time.
I mean, that must be the core of the how do I say it would seem that the magic of the premise here is in not knowing like fundamentally what's going on. Like that's one way to spin it. I could see this being taken by a GM or by a storyteller, like in a novel, like and choosing what the situation is right for them. But in enacting it, I could also see the climbing itself and the uncertainty about what's happened and what they've lost and having left their world to climb this being the story itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about this in terms of like mythology, like, well, if the dragon or the serpent is the thing that is, like the tower, I can consider like two options as to why that might be if I wanted to like create actual lore or at least rumors about what the tower is, right? I'm thinking that you could either do the very easy thing, which is, hey, we want the fruit of the world tree because, like it has some magical property. And from that, you can really just like extrapolate or just like expand upon like, well, it's going to give us godlike powers, or it's the only way that I know how to fix this curse or do whatever, right? That's the easy one. Like we're climbing this dragon because we want the fruit of the world tree. Alternatively, you could just be trying to stop the apocalypse, right? Like the existence of this world serpent like suggests that, hey, this thing is going to try and destroy the world tree. We have to ascend in order for us to be able to stop the jaws from closing in and like literally chomping at the bit, right?
Yeah. That I like that because then like the imagery could be, the tree isn't ripped in half yet, but the snake is constricting around it, like very gradually tightening each year to like crack it basically. So gradual that you wouldn't notice at all unless you actually started to keep records of it, which I imagine some of the inhabitants have.
Oh, and then you have like moments where branches or even shards of bark fall from the world tree, and that like, but like we're talking about like across eons, right? Where it's basically like watching tectonic plates shift, right? Like you can't see it happen, but over time, like, hey, remember that time that there was an avalanche of like tree bark and it wiped out an entire civilization? Like that level of like craziness, but just at such a slow pace that I think that it allows for a lot of really interesting narratives to unfurl during that time frame.
It makes me think that this tree or whatever is encircled by this creature has some sort of astral presence, because if people are coming from other realms, perhaps this tree like penetrates through all their realms, or it's the core or the heart of all their worlds. And so whenever people come here to try and save it, like that's why they're leaving their world behind. But this thing is in all worlds.
Yeah, like the roots each touch a different universe or world or something that people can somehow travel to this place. And like maybe as the serpent tightens its grip, like those connections get weaker or like fractured in some way.
It cuts off because like roots carry like nutrients to the tree, right? I can imagine like as it constricts, it cuts off roots of the tree, and that's meaning destroying worlds.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, that's really fucking cool, actually. I think this also kind of answers the tenet that Junie has about the corruption. Because like the things that are native to the serpent, of course they're going to be corrupted. They're like drinking the blood of a giant, world serpent. They're like powered up and they're like more wild and savage and stuff like that. And
they're like feeding on its corpse that it has fed on the lifeblood of the universe.
Exactly.
So it's like secondarily corrupt because it's the blood. It's like the desiccated goo left in this thing that's still alive that like poisons them as they drink it.
Exactly. There's like some profane ritual involved when you're drinking the nectar of the world tree or something like that. It just so happens to like course through the serpent's blood. So yeah, I think that works pretty well actually.
Yeah, and like maybe at the very top, yeah, its fangs are embedded in like a part of the tree, and that's where it's draining the nutrients out of.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't gotten to the third tenet yet, have we?
No.
Yeah, mine is actually very easy to work with too. So it's like I didn't want Ascension to merely be a physical thing where you're like, hey, I'm just going to travel up in a hot air balloon and fuck all you guys. I made it to the next level, no problem, right? I feel like that's a little bit too easy. So my tenet is there is a restriction beyond the physical to ascending the tower itself. Like now we're calling it the World Serpent. That's fine. Mm-hmm. And what this means is that at certain degrees along the route, you face a test of character. And originally I'm like, well, I don't want this to be just like a morality test. Like you have to be good in order to ascend. So I thought it'd be really cool if for every X amount of feet that you have to travel to ascend, your ideology has to get stronger and more focused or more crystallized. So you can be evil as fuck, but you have to believe in something to a certain extent. Like you have to, like, in your heart of hearts, whether it be, fascism, whether it be freedom, whether it be love, you have to have an ideal that is your resolve. And that is what is tested the further up you go.
I think an interesting way to reify that is that perhaps as you journey through this thing, it tries to incorporate you, like, or transform you. Maybe that's what the monsters are. They're people who get incorporated, and only by having a strong belief can you remain distinct from its flesh and its form. So I could see, like, the further you go up, so if you try and fly up a level, right? Let's say you brought a hot air balloon and you go up 3 levels, you can land on that level. The problem there is that you haven't built your identity strong enough. So as you start the journey, now you'll be easily consumed by it and transformed, which comports with your idea of like having a strong belief to keep your integrity.
And that's where the monsters come in too.
Yeah, they're the monsters. These
Absolutely.
people.
Yeah, that's cool. And like maybe the tenet says stronger and more deadly and more hostile, but maybe it's like they're not necessarily physically attacking you and like gnawing at you and stuff, but they're like making you doubt more, like weakening your mind until you get to the point where like you just give up and sit down, and that's when the tower really takes hold.
It's the kind of the astral quality of it. Could be that part of the horror isn't so much like, you could obviously have the visual body horror and transformation, all that cool stuff, especially from one of my favorite shows, Raised by Wolves, where there's an excellent scene involving a tree and a transformation that is absolutely worth seeing because it's horrific. But to your point,
bingo card, everyone, mark it off on your bingo card.
To your point, though, there's that aspect of losing your mind, and I think the weaker your mind, the more easily you're subject to that sort of horror.
Yeah, and I'm also just loving the idea that, like these incredibly strong and powerful warriors, they fought their way up, we are the chosen ones for sure. And like, we've slain behemoths and minotaurs and all these incredibly deadly foes. And then they like ascend another level, and the deadliest thing is not a monster, but like maybe it's just like this older woman who invites them into their cabin and asks them all of these kind of like semi-nihilistic questions, or like questions that directly contradicts their beliefs, and that's what gets them. It is not the monster with the fangs, but this old lady with a teapot, and she's like, come sit down, like have a chat with me, like tell me what you believe in. And then it's like that shakes them so bad, they're like, we thought we could do it, we couldn't get past that level, we had to descend back down so we weren't subsumed by the world serpent.
Yeah, and that would be such a cool scenario for an RPG to play in. Like, not only are you trying to survive physically, but you also have to support your fellow party members in their beliefs and like reaffirm what they're thinking and connect in that way emotionally and mentally.
It goes, if you have a system that supports this too. So for example, if I might plug my own, you can, as you traverse, instead of like building, the value isn't necessarily in building power, which is what Rob's hinting at, but I suppose, like you were saying before, it's about strengthening your ideology. So like in a game like ours where we have ethos, like the more you do that comports with your ethos, there could be a mechanic in such an adventure where you're collecting points towards that resolve. And so once you get to this test, you have more of a benefit to fight the test. Whereas if you were going through that part of the adventure and not doing things that align with your ethos, or not trying to comport with what you believe, you wouldn't have that resolve. And so you're more likely to fail. And I think that would be neat in an RPG, because then you can really show how that works mechanically and have the setting reflect what's happening.
And of course, that system that Daniel's talking about is OSR Plus, which you can find for free at osrplus.com and on YouTube at OSR Plus.
You done? You good with the shilling? Good. Okay. I was also thinking of the Heart RPG as well, because in that you have like pools of resources, or basically pools of HP, but the HP functions differently. There's literally like, there's the body, there's the mind, there's resources, there's reputation, and then there's also something called the weird, which is like how much the heart is corrupting you. And I feel like this is also an interesting manifestation of this, where your resolve is fighting against the corruption of the world serpent to a certain extent. And Daniel, I do love the OSR Plus method of ethos, but I feel like if you were to do something like this, you would obviously have to adapt it to make sure that that ethos aspect plays a more prominent role in a world like this,
Yeah, like in one campaign that he's running now, God Beyond the Portal, which you had played in previously, Rob, you can accumulate stress over time by being exposed to horrific things, or having your mind broken, or whatever, things like that. But I could see that being the same case here, where like each time you go against what you truly believe, you waver, you do something that flies in the face of what you think deep down, like then you get like a stress or some other sort of psychological damage token. I could also see like at the earlier stages of the tower, like you have some flexibility to make sure that's what you want to stick with for your belief. Like, are you sure you really think this is what you want to lock in, kind of thing? Like smaller tests, maybe even that the inhabitants of the tower give you to try to like strengthen you before your journey. But like once you really start, that's when you are at risk of accumulating the stress from going against what you think.
I mean, it's a comment too on what you guys are saying here with respect to like the mechanics reinforcing this. Like at the end of the day, when you get to these tests, you need something to support you in basically controlling your fate, right? It's because that's what's going to happen to you. Otherwise, you'll get transformed. Like whether it's ethos or whether it's something like out of heart, in both cases, as you comport with your beliefs. So in the case of ethos, I haven't played the other game they're talking about. The reason why you would want to do that, at least mechanically, is it gives you points, which are in our system are called fate points, that allow you to control the narrative. And just like you were saying with God Beyond the Portal, you're inclined to go mad, because the more you go mad and the more you invoke your madness, the more you get that benefit of fate points that let you control the narrative. So in this setting, the more you do the things that align with your ideology, the more resolve you've built up to control your fate, because that's the test you're going to face in the end. And so that's the purpose, just to loop back to ethos. That's the purpose of ethos in our system, is the more you play to the character concept you created, the more you get rewarded with control over the narrative. And so in this setting, it's the same thing, but we've literally made it the case physically.
I love the idea of it being a resource that you gather, and like every now and then it'll be like time to pay the toll, like time. And so like it enforces that kind of like, oh shit, I haven't built up enough, ethos or resolve or whatever. Oh God, I haven't been playing my character. I've been having so many doubts lately. And like that kind of like dread of recognizing that you have a low resource pool or something like that. I think that's kind of an interesting conceit to conceive of as well, right? Like that's really interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. We're getting in the weeds when it comes to this stuff. Let's focus back on the world building. Although I could talk about this with Daniel and Courtney for a very long time, but do we need to answer any questions about the world before we get into our recap and roll for the twist?
I don't think so. One thing that we had brought up previously was like the fruit of the world tree, and then all this talk of like temptation and doubt. Maybe there are branches that are actually like sticking through the serpent's body from the tree that have been like
Oh yeah.
corrupted by it. And of course, it would be like apples or some kind of fruit where, if you give in some temptation and bite it, or maybe that's like a certain test that you have to pass at some point where you eat an apple and it's been corrupted by the serpent's blood, the serpent's nature. So you have to like will yourself against that to like not doubt yourself in what you think.
I love the idea that there are also sections of the world tree that are incredibly thorny. And so as the world serpent constricts into the tree, it's like opening wounds up into itself. So there's Courtney, you're welcome. There's blood waterfalls from the serpent itself.
Oh yeah.
And so like there are just swaths of the tree that are or swaths of the tower that are just like very corrupted and very like this is like the savage lands basically, right? Where it's like everything is super hyper corrupted and everything is monstrous. Like you can have sections where that happens for sure. And yeah, I like the idea that you can see glimpses of the tree itself where like, ooh, that's interesting. Ooh, I can also imagine that if you wanted to keep this setting to be like more fantastical or like more fantasy-ish, you could do something where it's like, hey, the best weapons are like from the world tree and from the world serpent. So it's like gathering those resources to be like, ooh, I got a thorn of the world tree. That is going to be a very powerful weapon someday, like something like that. I think that'd be kind of cool, interesting to conceive of too.
Yeah. And like another thought that I had, I know my tenet was the tower is the calcified corpse, but thinking about this now, maybe it's only like the lower portions that are calcified or dying or preserved in some way that are like kind of sealed in place and are safer to build in. But as you go up more, the creature is like more alive and can like shift around and then obviously the blood that you were talking about and like other things become an issue as you go up.
Okay, maybe I love that idea. First of all, that's really awesome. Maybe what's happening is not necessarily that this thing is dying, but maybe as it feasts on the world tree, more of it becomes animate. So, it's kind of the opposite of what you're suggesting here in that. Yeah. So as it guzzles the nectar, as it continues to eat the world tree, more of it becomes alive. And there's an end time where when the entirety of the serpent is, made alive again, guess what? That is Ragnarok. That's the end of the world.
Yeah.
It would also invite antagonists. So like you can have people who worship the serpent and they're cultists of it, and they've made their society inside, of course, to try and further its nourishment so that they can end the world because that's what they want.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, come on, like I can easily see that. It's like, look, the world's got to end. Like, it's not even like an unreasonable end of the world type cult too. It's like, guys, the world's gone on long enough. Like, you're just trying to delay the inevitable. Like, let's just put down our weapons and let this serpent eat the world. Can we get that? Can we do that, please?
You can have villains who are more cartoonish. I've been watching the old X-Men and now the new X-Men, which is fantastic. It is so good. But what it brings to mind, like Apocalypse, right? Who just irrationally wants to destroy the world and the universe. So, like I could see these cultists who they want to just end the world, but like they're ending all of the worlds, right? If they were able to bring this thing to life. It's kind of, isn't there in D&D, isn't there like some god, like I think it's called Dendar, the Night Serpent or something? That we were playing in 5e and that it came up as a thing where that creature also is, they're the snake people worship it. and they want to bring it into the world so they can end everything. I think it has like a sphere of annihilation involved, but it's the same sort of thing, like this irrational desire to end everything.
Daniel, you mentioned Apocalypse, and I have to bring up one of my favorite quotes from them, which is, "I am the rocks of the eternal shore, crash upon me and be broken."
Yes, he has such good speeches. I mean, what gets me, and like what gets me about X-Men, I was talking about this like in our channel, it's just like it's so over the top. Like the villains are such monologuing like douches, and I love it. I love every second of it. Like every time Magneto says some like extremely emo 4-minute monologue or Apocalypse, he just has those one-liners that are amazing. That's what I'm here for. And that was like the late 80s, early 90s, you know?
It was 97 because X-Men 97. Yeah, I'm
right. But I mean, like the Masters of the Universe, like was like 86, I think.
Oh,
like,
sure.
It's like that whole culture from late 80s to the 90s, like was about villains who were Shakespearean and cartoonish, but they really believed in something, no matter how absurd it was. You know, Skeletor, he's ridiculous, right? I'm thinking of movie Skeletor, of course, because that's right. Movie Skeletor is the one that matters. It's Frank Langella. Like he really believes in whatever absurd concept it is, and I can see these cultists being similar. You know,
I agree. I think that moral gray characters have their place, but every now and then you want a good like scenery chewing straight up bad guy. Daniel, X-Men 97. How far are you into that series before I say anything?
I only have gotten up to the episode with Mojo, which was amazing. Like I really, it's so rare to see a show where they really respect the source material, and it's like an homage as well as an extension. I'm just like really impressed by it. Like visually and the writing is better. Like they took what was goofy and they made it heartfelt, but also interesting and exciting.
I will say no more because spoilers, but man, yeah, there's a lot going on there. Magneto has some banger lines.
I know. He delivers like this isn't a spoiler, but like he delivers a speech to like these Supreme Court adjacent judges in space. Like amazing. Like in the atmosphere. I don't like his costume, but I understand it's from like comic or whatever. But like I want him to put his helmet back on. Please, I hope that happens. I don't believe, okay, no spoilers, but I don't believe that he's a good guy. I think either he's fooling about it or maybe he's just having like, I don't know. I don't trust it. I don't trust him.
We need to stop. Daniel, we need to stop, please.
Well, one thing before that, I just looked up his costume out of curiosity. Yeah,
it's terrible. It's so stupid.
But it's so 90s. That's what
it is very 90s.
It's just
showing off his shoulders.
Like, what did you do, my boy?
Okay. I'll say this. It's not a spoiler. It's a meme. So I saw a meme with Magneto where it's like, shut up, Fives. A 10 is talking. And then
that's what he's like.
Yeah. And then he's like talking to Storm, and Storm says, "Well, I'm an 11, but go on."
Yeah. He's my favorite. I mean, well, it's a toss-up between him and Apocalypse. Those are my favorite X-Men characters.
Yeah. That's totally fair. I think that's there's no notes, Daniel. No notes. But okay. Let's get back.
Sorry, I took us afield.
No. That is totally okay. I think we're ready to do the recap and roll and reconcile the twist. Are we ready?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So Courtney, you kicked us off. What was your tenet for this particular prompt?
Yep, that was that the tower is the calcified or preserved in some way corpse of a unimaginably large entity, and I definitely think that's solidly in place with what we have with the serpent and everything.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Daniel, what was your tenet for this particular prompt?
That the quote unquote native inhabitants of the place are in fact former tower climbers who didn't leave.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we've established that pretty well. Is there anything that we need to develop further, or are we happy with that?
No, I think that they are pretty integral to the plot.
Yeah, and I think that if you were to build this out as like a RPG setting, you could do more work on those kind of tribes or groups of people who have crossed over. Maybe even get your players to help out brainstorming some ideas for groups.
I think that there's also an interesting conceit where these communities that we're talking about are built around ideologies or ideological extremes. Because if you for my third tenet, if you'll recall, for my tenet, it was you are tested the further you go, the further you ascend along the tower, and your resolve is tested. You need to believe in something so strongly that you are able to continue to travel upwards. Daniel added to that and suggested that if you don't have the resolve, then you're absorbed by the world serpent, which I'm very happy with. And going back to what we were talking about in terms of like the native communities, I think that, yeah, that totally makes sense. Like, hey, this person really believed in this, and their offspring and their community is built around this ideal.
Yeah, exactly. And it also suggests perhaps that the higher you go, the more it becomes a battle of the mind, which is interesting. Like, it's almost like you are literally, what's the word for it? Not sublimating, but you're like literally becoming spiritual the higher up you're going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I very much appreciate the idea that it's not just about physical traversal or like you have to be physically strong enough. That to me, I think that aspect helps this, especially when you add in everything else that we've talked about, adds a lot to the overall thematics of this particular, setting. So now that we've got the recap, let's go ahead and roll for the twist and figure out what we're going to be doing. So our twist this time is the world is much smaller than you think. How does that work when we have like a literal world tree, world serpent that's like encompassing multiple worlds? Like, how do we reconcile that twist?
I mean, I have an idea, but I don't want to make this as the direction we go. But this is what I want to throw out because I think it could make sense of it. But I was thinking too about what if this tower was really like a conception for someone. So like in the sense that maybe I'm a student, right? Like just to go with like something that's closer to home for you. I'm a student and I'm having some troubles in life and my schooling and stuff. And I'm facing some really huge dilemma or crisis that for everyone else isn't really a big deal. But for me as a student, it's a huge deal, right? This is about my future and my life, right? And so when I go through this crisis, I have a crisis of mind and I'm sent to a place that is the tower to climb up and resolve the problem, like metaphorically speaking. So I could see you creating this as a story where it's like you tell it in two sides. Like one side is the kind of slice of life of this person, dealing with their problems in real life. And the other side is the fantasy version of them climbing the tower. And so like the climbing the tower aspect has metaphors for what's happening in the real life. So I can see that being a fun sort of literary fiction take on it where, the world is much smaller. It's really just this kid's problem, but it's personified in the fantasy realm through the tower.
I like that a lot. It's got big persona vibes, which I appreciate.
Oh yeah.
But I just like the idea that it is like an individual, and also it works well with the ideology type thing too, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
And because it would then suggest that like the kind of corrupt like creatures and ideologies are like poisonous things that person has dealt with or heard from like in the outer world to a certain extent.
Yeah, like trauma personified, depression, anxiety, all these other mental things that can pop in and start wearing down your psyche, basically.
Damn, that's fucking like that's kind of deep. Like, hey, what's the world serpent that's currently strangling you right now? Is it your depression? Is it your alcoholism? Is it other thing? Like, what's going on with you? What is your current world serpent? What's gnawing at the heart of your world? Yeah, that's kind of crazy. I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah, and that could be like a very interesting way to shape the tower itself too. Like, for example, if you're running an RPG and in your session 0, maybe part of what you have your players do is like build the person who's experiencing these doubts and so on. So like, one person suggests like they're worried about getting laid off from their job, and somebody else says like they've started to drink too much. It's bleeding into like their life now, and so on, and like build things in the tower based on that. So like maybe the alcoholism is something having to do with temptations and stuff like that in the tower itself, or like maybe so maybe like the alcoholism could come into play as creatures that try to tempt you with things that initially make your characters feel good but will wear you down over time, or the layoff could come in the form of like extreme risk of being like shoved out of the tower and falling to your death, that sort of stuff. I think it could all like be built in and turned into actual things in the story.
I love the allegory of self-actualization that we're creating here, where, like, you're going to get stuck on the tower sometimes. It's just inevitable. Just don't let the world serpent take you. Just keep climbing. There's something that's kind of fun about that.
I also really love mechanically the idea of building the person as part of the game, because then each player is going to get invested, and also they're building the scenario as they're doing that in such a simple way, which I think that's like at the heart of running a really cool module. I think if you did it that way.
Yeah, you could. I mean, it also reminds me of Bluebeard's Bride, actually, because you're in that the session 0 is about building the bride in the bride story. And you do that, like the characters in that, or the players in that game don't play characters. They play like aspects of the bride's psyche. And so you can create that one character the way that people would create the bride. And then, what are they, like what's troubling them in their life? And then you represent aspects of that person's psyche as you're ascending this tower. Like, yeah, that totally works.
Yeah, definitely. No, I like where this is built up to. This is cool.
Yeah, this is cool as hell. It's really cool. But unfortunately, it is time to end this episode of World Build with us. Had a great time with this one. I think this is really cool. It's got legs, I would encourage everyone to take the allegory of the tower and keep climbing if you're in that spot yourself. Yeah, exactly. We're so deep here on this podcast, but
very
but yeah, that is going to do it for this episode. A big thank you to our new, maybe not a new listener, but a new prompt submitter for sure. So thank you, Junhee, for that. Really appreciate it. By the way, to everyone listening, some of these names we're not entirely sure on how to pronounce properly. So if you would want to add in parentheses, if you're even remotely unsure, because I feel bad for mispronouncing names, just toss it in there in the email when you submit it. It'll pull, in this line that says, who's this from? Type in the name and then parentheses with the pronunciation. That'd be helpful. Or if you don't give a shit, hey, that's fine too. But with that being said, remember that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, click the link and follow some instructions. And within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, YouTube and Twitter, we're there. Check the show notes. And, you might be listening to this on YouTube right now. Who knows? If you want to talk to us more directly, if you want to come and talk to us about, how you're doing with your climbing the tower, go to our Discord, chat with us there. We're always welcome to see. We're always happy to see new people. And of course, we're even happier to have the support of our patrons. A huge, huge thank you to all of our patrons for your continued support. So if you want to join our patrons, if you want to say thanks for the podcast, you can always go to our Patreon. And don't worry, you don't just get nothing in return. You get some sweet, sweet patron-only goodies. So go ahead over to our Patreon and donate there if you feel like it. That's going to do it for this episode of World Build with us. Remember that we love you very much. We're going to get through this together. Until next week.